Love
G'day
it.
team, welcome to another instalment of the U Project. Tiffany Ann Cook over there at TYP Central, just steering the ship beautifully. Good morning.
Good morning, Craig Anthony Harper. How are you?
Oh, look, I'm just terrific. I'm excited because you, as you always do, have secured another stellar guest.
Yes.
You're going all right.
And she has got the coolest accent. I'm kind of excited to sit back and listen.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, to the good doc, she has no accent, but to her, we've got weird accents,
Yes,
right?
I know. I love listening to yours. So there we go. We can just listen to each other. There you go.
Well, you've already introduced yourself. Dr. Caroline Leaf, give me 1 sec. I'll tell my listeners a tiny bit about you.
Absolutely.
You spent the last 30 years researching the mind-brain connection, the nature of mental health and the formation of memory. Being one of the first in your field to study how the brain can change with directed mind input, neuroplasticity. Throughout your years of clinical practice has helped hundreds of thousands of people learn how to use their mind to detox and grow their brain to succeed in every area of their lives, including school, university, and the workplace. The good doc is also the best-selling author of Switch on Your Brain, Think, Learn, Succeed, Think and Eat Yourself. I need to get that book. Think and Eat Yourself Smart, definitely do. And many more. She teaches at academic, medical, and neuroscience conferences, churches, and to various audiences around the world. The good doc is also involved in the global ECHO movement, which trains physicians worldwide on the mind, brain, body connection, mental health, and how to avoid physician burnout. All important things. Hi, Caroline. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm impressed that you do this every day.
Well, you know, we're in lockdown about 98% of our lives, so we got nothing else to do. So we just
talk.
You know, someone sneezes in Melbourne, and we have a 9 o'clock curfew. But now you're in Houston.
I love it.
You're in Houston.
Dallas.
Dallas. Sorry.
No problem.
Dallas. Close. All right, not close at all. What's the
close, about 4 hours away.
4 hours, so not close at all, Craig, you idiot.
2.5
What's
hours.
What's the COVID status in Texas at the minute?
Well, it's pretty bad here, but Texas has a very laid-back attitude, and unfortunately have a governor that's not listening to the scientists, which is unfortunate, because there's now this whole debate between masking and everything. So, you know, it's just a stage where people need to just really get vaccinated, put on their masks, and do what they're supposed to do. But yeah, it's really, you go to I travel all over the country, and everywhere else we go, mask up everywhere. In Dallas, Texas, there's very little awareness, but there's a huge problem. The hospitals are overflowing with breakthrough Delta variant. It's really raging here, like it is all over the place. So it's really needs to be. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of months.
Oh, my goodness. It certainly is. It's interesting on a range of levels, but let's not have another COVID conversation, Tiff, because
you're tired of it.
I think I'm going to punch myself in the face if I have another COVID conversation.
I agree with you. It's just like, let's talk about everything except COVID.
And let's do that. Now, clearly you didn't grow up in Texas. Give us the snapshot where you grew up.
Absolutely. I actually was born in Zimbabwe, in Africa, and grew up in South Africa, and have been living in the States for the past 13 years. I have an Italian, my dad's dead, but it's Italian dad, English mom, and basically married to a Swiss. So I have a whole mixture. We travel all over the world. So that's probably why my accent's so weird.
Wow.
Next up.
Wow.
So,
that is truly multicultural. That is true.
Multicultural.
That is global. So anyway, very nice to meet you. So I'm excited to talk to you. I listened to a couple of things. Just when I think I've met all the smart people in the mind brain space, which I clearly haven't, then I meet you. I watched a TED talk, which was brilliant. I watched a couple of radio interviews that were also video. I watched a few bits and pieces. Where did the fascination for understanding the mind come from? Was that innate, or was that just a door that opened through your research in your undergrad stuff? Or
actually, I've always had an absolute passion for mind and brain, and I was going into neurosurgery from a young child. That was all I wanted to do. And then when I started, I got into medical school, and I actually changed my degree and started doing a combination, which was a new degree that was exposed us, because back in the 80s, and you and I are the same age. So back in the 80s, neuroscience was in its absolute infancy. It wasn't even spoken about much, but they had this created this new degree that exposed us to part medicine, part neuroscience, part communication pathology. It was kind of a 7-year degree that they tested out and squashed into 4 years and made us work 7 days a week. And while I was doing it, I thought, why am I doing this to myself? But in retrospect, it was one of the best things that could have happened, because it exposed me to such a wide variety of ways of thinking. I wasn't just stuck in a biomedical model or a psychological model. I was exposed to so many different ways of thinking. And in one of my neuroscience lectures, what really triggered the research side, which has been going on now for 38 years, it was a statement made by one of our neuroscience professors saying that the brain couldn't change. And in the 80s, if you may recall, the mind and the brain were seen as separate. Now, in our current language, the mind and the brain are seen as one thing. And the brain is sort of like they currently speak about the brain producing the mind, which is scientifically impossible, but that's kind of the language of today. But then there was very clear the distinction, but they didn't believe that the brain could change. And that didn't make sense. And I remember saying to my professor that, but we're having new experiences all the time. I mean, I'm not the same now as I was when I walked into this lecture. So our mind is changing, and the organ is the brain is the organ that the mind uses. So therefore the brain must change. And that professor actually said, that's a ridiculous question, but you know what, start some research. So I did. I took traumatic brain injured patients, because at that stage there was just no research being done. Very little research being done on people with brain injuries, because they didn't believe there was any point in studying a brain that couldn't change once it's damaged. And I thought, well, that's such a hopeless outlook. So I said, give me the worst population. And I set up a study, and from then I haven't stopped. And I did some of the first, as you mentioned, neuroplasticity research in my field back in the late 80s, 90s, before we had fMRI and all the wonderful technology we have today. I was working with things like CT scans and so on. But I'm really pleased, because I had to show change in people in different ways, and I had to show that their intellectual status changed, and their academic performance, and their cognitive function, and their social emotional, and so on. So it was very challenging, and from there I was working with traumatic brain injured and different populations, dementias, Alzheimer's, in a very clinical sense, as a clinical neuroscientist. And then I started developing systems in desperation, and I say systems and theories, to try and help understand mind and brain. What is this difference? What is mind? What is brain? What's the relationship? What's mind, brain, body? What are thoughts? What are memories? What are emotions? Where does it all fit in, and how much agency do we have? And I was very fortunate to be studying in South Africa, because I spent 25 years, not in a lab, but I spent 25 years really digging deep into different communities in the apartheid era, the transition, the post-apartheid, that terrible time in South Africa's history. But it really gave me a good understanding of mind and resilience of the human, and what mind really is. And at the same time, I was running a practice for the privileged who could afford to go and get therapy. And so it was just interesting to see the different worlds and socioeconomic strata. And I worked in Rwanda, in war-torn Rwanda, post-genocide. And so all of that put together in the melting pot has given me a tremendous ongoing desire to understand mind. And it's a moving target all the time, because we keep on advancing. But that really has triggered and driven my passion. And if we understand mind, what I've seen is, when you understand what your mind is, you can actually get a level of agency that can give you peace in the midst of chaos. And that's the sort of thing that keeps humans going, is understand, okay, there's chaos, but I've got this. Somehow I've got this. Don't know how, don't know what it looks like. It's making me upset. It's making me mad. And it gives you give yourself permission to process and accept that, but you can still keep moving forward. So that's what I've tried to do, and translate that into applicable systems for mental health. And I've been trying to challenge the current very negative mental health narrative for the last 38 years.
I love it. I love it. And so much of the human experience, beautifully articulated, you don't need me to tell you that, but I love it. But so much of the human experience is about how do I manage me in the middle of the unmanageableness of all the other stuff that's not me. All that, there's the me stuff, right? Mind, body, brain, emotions, decisions, feelings, actions, reactions, all the Craig stuff. And then there's the non-Craig stuff that, for the most part, I can't even influence, let alone control. And so for me, it's about the recognition of where do I end and where does the other stuff start, and what's the best use of my attention and focus and energy.
Oh, I love how you said that, Craig. And that's just a phenomenal example of of exactly what I've been researching. Literally, you've summarized it in such a nice, simple way. Essentially, we can't control the events and circumstances of life. We can't control other people. We can't change what's happened to us. So the only thing we can change is what's in us and how we're going to reconceptualize that and respond in the future. Because trauma has happened, will happen, and will continue to happen because of the fact that we can't control events and circumstances and what other people are doing. So we have to be prepared for, as you say, here's Craig and there's the world, and that world is uncontrollable. So how do I manage me in the midst of this chaos? And because we can't separate ourselves from the environment's impacting us. I mean, just look all around, you can't separate yourself. So we can't be individuals living in isolation, as we've so clearly seen with the COVID pandemic, but we have to recognize the tremendous impact that environment has on us and the impact we have on the environment.
Yeah.
And look at that in a very responsible way. And I talk about that as being mind management, the concept of mind management. And I believe that's a skill that is not trained enough. And it's something that we should be training in our kids very young. My kids have got 4 adult children. They've been grown up with this stuff. In the schools, I've worked in schools around the country, around the world, around the globe. And it's one of the first things that I teach is and introduce into schools is we've got to introduce mind management training to kids as young as 2 and 3 and 4. You can start already teaching to developing the whole wise mind, self-regulation, understanding emotions, what to do with thoughts, etc., etc. And if we did that, if we did that consistently in all schools and continue to train adults, because life's so organic and things are so organic and our story's never written and things keep changing. We constantly need to develop that, and we need to be creating a society that enables us to manage those processes.
Yeah. And in the middle of all of the inconsistency and variability and unpredictability and uncertainty, there's one constant in my life, and that's me. So I need to try and manage me. And
exactly.
What's interesting is I heard you mention briefly talking about the idea of success in one of your talks. I can't remember exactly what you said, but what's really apparent to me is that most of us, not all of us, but most of us grow up in a paradigm that says that success is about all things external, where you live and your bank balance and what you drive. And my listeners are sick of me saying this because I say it a lot, but all the kind of non-me stuff.
I say it too.
Situation, circumstance, bank balance, environment, brand, car, reputation, profile, pretty face, handsome face, body, right? And all of that stuff is, they're great. They're KPIs of sorts, I guess. But we all know that we can have the external kind of Hollywood appearance, but in the middle of all of that, it's an internal, excuse my language, Doc, it's an internal shitstorm, right?
Exactly.
And in the middle of that, there's emotional and spiritual and psychological turmoil. But from the outside looking in, it's like a Disney movie.
Exactly, especially with social media, which has really, capitalized on that concept and the whole positive psychology movement and, and sort of well-being movement. And I'm not anti well-being, obviously, and the well-being movement. Thank goodness it's brought a level of independence and people resolving to sort of take autonomy and not feel helpless, that they can actually do something for themselves and not just rely on doctors and external people. But you're quite right, that value, that is not success. It's actually, in my measure, that can create so much strain. So if you're unhappy inside yourself, it's never going to be enough, because the outside in is never the way, it's the inside out. And that's why I always say the definition for me of success is having peace in the midst of chaos. And I see another huge part of success is being able to give yourself permission to be a mess and to give yourself permission to actually manage that mess. And that's become such a huge part of what I teach. It's become a kind of overriding sort of statement that I make all the time, that it really is okay to be a mess, because we can see in our psychoneurobiology, mind, brain, body connection, that we actually wired for, wired. We are designed for the optimism bias. We're literally wired for love. One Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist actually said that. So we're always going for survival. We're going for restoration of balance. We're going for so our whole body's not designed to have the COVID virus. That's why the COVID virus has been fought. And we said we weren't going to talk about COVID, but it's a great example to show that when something foreign invades our brain and our body and our mind, and that upsets the natural balance, we are drawn to that to repair it, to get rid of it, to restore the balance, and that's survival. And if we take that approach to our mind, it actually brings a whole different kind of perspective, because mind, then what is mind and what does it do in the brain, and what's the relationship with something like the COVID virus, and how does this link back to success? So before we dive down that road of mind and brain and proteins and COVID and whatever, coming back to the concept of success, we've got to be able to understand that it's very normal to feel the emotions of depression. You can't have depression. You can't have anxiety. They're not diseases. They are responses. They're warning signals. There are helpful messengers that are actually gifts, if you read them properly, to tell you that something's going on in your life. Because it's not who you are, it's how you're showing up. And it's a call from your emotion, from your mind-brain-body connection, to tell you to go and restore balance. You're drawn to it to restore the balance. But that's not how it's being packaged in the current day and age. And I've seen this change over the last 40 years, is it's basically been packaged as, oh, you have these symptoms, therefore you have a brain disease like cancer is a disease. And that's just not good science. It's not healthy for humans. And the evidence is there. It hasn't worked. Mental health has not improved. Depression has not got better. And it's never going anywhere. That's the other thing. We shouldn't be trying to eliminate depression or trying to eliminate anxiety, because they actually need to be managed, because they are signals teaching you to be a thought detective, to work out what's going on in your life so that you can restore to that balance and access a wise mind and be successful, which is, maybe you don't have the fancy car and all that money in your bank account, but you've got peace, and you can cry, and you can own, and you can express your emotions, and you can get mad, but then you can repair it and grow, as opposed to staying stuck there. So it's own the mess, repair, and grow.
I love it. And there seems to be a lot of focus on, kind of medicating the symptom, but not addressing the cause, I
love that.
Not addressing the underlying. So what's causing, let's talk about that. Yeah, we can put a Band-Aid on your scratch. We get that. We can put your arm in a sling, metaphorically. We get that. And there's certainly a place for medication, of course, but also let's do a deep dive and go, well, where is that anxiety coming from? What's the fear, or what's the concern, or what's that, so that we're not just treating something on a physiological level, but understanding the emotional and or psychological, perhaps, catalyst for that physical consequence.
And I agree with everything you've said, and it's what I teach all the time. But here's the paradox. Pretty much all humans, most people, if you talk to them, they'll say that this is not, we get this. We get that there's a reason.
Yeah.
Yet when it comes to the management, we forget all about the fact that there's a reason. And we try and put the Band-Aid on the bullet wound. We try and put that Band-Aid on that bullet wound, and we try and just cut the head off the weed, but never get the weed, never get the roots out.
Yeah.
And, things like CBT, and there's some amazing techniques out there, but if they are used wrong, if positive thinking, affirmations, these are all gratitude statements. None of them on their own are bad things, but if they're used incorrectly, in the incorrect way, you are basically putting people into helpless positions, because you're teaching them to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, which is not healing the process. You're not getting to the cause. You're chopping the head off the weed. It keeps growing back. So for a few days you're fine, and then it's all back again. So we can't just cover a thought with another thought. You can't just think a positive thought and it's all going to go away. You have to deconstruct and reconstruct. And that is a process of embracing and processing and reconceptualizing. And that's hard work. It takes time. There's a process involved. And our mind's working anyway, so we may as well do it, because if you don't do it, our mind stays a mess. So what I've tried to do, Craig, over these 38 years is, besides helping people in deep needy states like traumatic brain injuries and so on, is also just to help us manage life as humans, because we're living with ourselves 24/7. As you said, Craig, is the constant. You wake up in the middle of the night and you've got that anxiety. You can't go phone your coach at 12 o'clock at night, or go see your therapist at 1 o'clock in the morning. You've got to deal with that. How are you managing your mind? How do you manage your mind in the moment when, just before you're about to do an interview, maybe someone sends you a terrible email and you get completely thrown off guard? How do you get your mind back under control so you can focus on the the business at hand. And that mind management is a skill that we need to teach our kids, as I've said, and teach that through and practice that daily, all the time. And that's where I've focused a tremendous amount of my energy in the last few years, is getting that level brought back into society as a sort of way of operating, because mind is first cause. The difference between us and a dead person right now is our mind. Because a dead person's brain is not going to respond to a QEEG. Their mind, their heart's not going to respond to an EKG. You can stick them in a CT scan and nothing's going to happen. The body's disintegrating in a dead person. But in you and I right now, all that same technology, we're going to see responses everywhere. And those responses keep changing. So the response that the brain and body are giving is where mind is showing up. So mind is driving brain. Mind is first cause, and it's showing up in the brain and the body. And so we can, and that's why depression and pain in our body and changes in behavior and changes in perspective towards life are all signals of what is actually going on in our mind, because our mind is using our brain and body in order to express ourselves. So it's mind, brain, body, and then we express ourselves. So if expressing ourselves in a toxic way, you have to get to the root, which is you have to get back to what is listening to the brain and signals from the brain and the body and the mind to go and find out what is in the mind, what happened. And I always use these trees. I don't know if you saw if you watched me on YouTube or anywhere, you'll see I'm always holding up these two trees, because thoughts look like trees, as you'll be learning doing in your neuroscience. I don't know what you're doing your neuroscience PhD on, but basically if you're doing anything about memory and stuff, basically they build on the dendrites. And I mean, I've done a lot of research on memory, and basically memory are these little branches inside the tree. So the tree is the thought, and the thought is made of memories, and the roots are the source, the origin story, and that's the interpretation. So this podcast now is good stuff we're talking about. So our conversations in the roots, but everyone listening is interpreting it in their own way. So the branches are your unique mind interpretation, your way that you think, feel, and choose. So that's healthy. But if it's toxic, here's the root. So coming back to your point of, you can't just go and put a Band-Aid on this, because it's not going to fix it. You can't just go and medicate with a psychotropic, because a psychotropic's not fixing anything. A psychotropic's just numbing the brain and damaging the brain and giving you temporary relief, but it's not fixing the problem. It's like an ibuprofen or a Tylenol or something's not fixing the problem. It's giving temporary relief. So until you actually understand this via the signals to the interpretation, to the processing, to the roots, you are going to get stuck with this. And then this in itself is real. It's made of proteins. It's made of chemicals. It's real. It's as real as the COVID virus. Thoughts are real things. They change the structure of the brain. You're changing the structure of your brain right now as you're listening to me at 400 billion actions per second. So therefore, we are changing our brain in these different directions. This would be toxic. This would be healthy. And if we are going to find out how to fix this, we have to listen to its signals. What are its signals? Our emotions, like depression, anxiety. So you can't have depression, because people say that they've been diagnosed with bipolar or diagnosed with general or anxiety disorder. You can't do that. You can have cancer, but you can't have depression, because depression is an experience. It's a warning signal. It's part of a grouping of signals that is coming from your mind, brain, and body combination to help you to be able to find the root. So it's the, hello, catch me, wake up, listen to me. I'm telling you something, start digging, start becoming a thought detective to identify. So that's kind of what mind management is, being a thought detective.
I love that. I'm writing down the thought detective, because that might be the name of this episode, the thought detective. You know what else
That's good. It's the name of my book. I'm busy writing another book at the moment.
All right.
And it's not this one. This is one I just wrote. We released this year. And it's basically about being a thought detective to build insurance policies in your brain.
You know, I love that whole metacognitive vibe of, starting to become aware of how you think. I think most of us, because we're all day, every day, we're just doing life, right? And we talk on this show a lot about the inner world. I talk to people about two worlds: physical, external, three-dimensional world, and then the other one, the one that you actually live in, right? There's one where you kind of do stuff in and where life happens, and the world outside you and the world in you. But we're so often externally focused because we've got to get the kids ready. We've got to pay the bills. We've got to get the car fixed. We've got to go do the job. We've got to, go for a jog. We've got to hit the gym. We've got to go to church. We've got to tuck the kids in. We've got to read a story. We've got to worry about COVID. We've got whatever, there's just this, most of us have almost whether it's self-created or it's legit, but an endless to-do list of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea of introspection and reflection and where does my thinking, like what's reality, what's the practical, situation, circumstance, environment, condition, and then what's my story about it? Like this separation of my story, my thinking, my personally self-created reality versus what's going on around me. And so when I often say to audiences, oops, sorry everyone, I just knocked my mic over. I'm a super professional. Tiff will punch me in the face for that later, Doc. I often say to audiences, put up your hand if you're open-minded or you consider yourself to be open-minded and objective. And everyone puts up their hand because everyone goes, yeah, I'm completely objective because it sounds good.
Completely open-minded, yeah.
Yeah, because it sounds good. And I go, well, if you have any pre-existing beliefs, ideas, values, experiences, programming, conditioning, then you're not open-minded or objective. You might be in some ways, but, just to kind of identify that, all right, there's 200 people in the room and no one's having the same experience. We're in the same place listening to the same guy, but we're all having a unique experience. Where does that come from? And I think that's
the question I've been trying to answer for 38 years. And I believe
this is what fascinates me also, is understanding, not only understanding the way that I am now creating, even in this moment with you and Tiff, and right now as we're talking, no one's listening but us three, but as our listeners eventually listen to this tomorrow, it's a different construct, right? But not only understanding that my reality is only my reality, but also being aware of how I create that reality for better or worse. And being also, and I love this, being aware of my programming and being aware that the way that I interpret the world around me in this moment in time, in this conversation with you, Doc, is predicated largely on the way that my mind has been trained and taught and told and programmed. Exactly. And that awareness of self is opening the door on, which is part of my PhD, is opening the door on self-awareness on that level.
And if you don't have self-awareness, you can't begin to change. We all have self-awareness to a certain extent, as you've been saying, but that self-awareness is not always very valid and real, and that's where, or not it's realistic. As you said, the pre-programming lead you to not being as objective as you think you are, because you've got all these thoughts and these preconceived ideas that have come up from your culture and your the race that you are and where you live, all the stuff that we know. And people don't realize how that drives us. Those are non-conscious drivers. And in the research I've done, I talk about the different levels of mind. And I know everyone's heard of these terms. And one term most people haven't heard of is the non-conscious. And that's the most important part of mind, and it's the most unspoken part of in terms of mind. So our conscious mind is what we're operating in at the moment while we're talking. So our conscious mind is easy to understand. It's what when we're awake, okay? But it goes to sleep. The conscious mind goes to sleep and it has to regenerate. It's limited in energy. It's limited in speed. Between the non-conscious and there's another level, there's a deeper, more magnificently huge, fast level that never goes to sleep. And that's called the non-conscious, N-O-N. And that's the part of mind that most people don't understand, that I have also spent many years studying, because that is the part of the mind that is where all these preconceived ideas that are built into thought networks that are coming from. So we have all, and some of them may not be as toxic as this, but they just may be very, have a level of these different levels of toxicity. But if it's hurting someone else, it's toxic. So if you believe that your religion is the only religion and it's hurting other people, it's toxic. And it may have all kinds of good values within it, but if it's hurting someone else, it's coming from a toxic place. Toxic masculinity, men don't cry, women have got to do this, men, all these things, and race and all the stuff that we're talking about, these are all actual thought trees in our non-conscious mind. But in our brain they look like trees, but in our mind they look like gravitational fields. because the mind is the energy force that is actually driving the brain. And this is not any woo-woo stuff. This is stuff that Einstein worked on, that we have Nobel Prize winners on doing work in gravitational fields, electromagnetic light forces, etc. So what we see around a human, and I've got another little model, I like my models, as you noticed, the human brain and body, if we're alive, as I keep saying, so we can easily pick up gravitational fields from an fMRI. We can pick it up. There's various different ways we can pick up the polarity in our blood, and that's all very sciencey stuff. But if you're dead, none of that exists. So this is like taking the mind is like taking a white sheet of paper and putting a bunch of iron filings on it, and then take a magnet, and the magnet is your brain. And you can hold up that magnet and it does something, but you don't know what it does until you bring a piece of metal close to it. Then suddenly the metal, paper clip or something will, cling to it. Or you can pop that iron filing down, that magnet in a mountain of iron filings, and it'll arrange itself into this beautiful spiderweb looking field. So what you've demonstrated there is an electromagnetic field. What is my point? The magnet's like your brain and body. The brain and body and your mind, you can't see your mind, but we can see evidence of mind. And the evidence is the pattern of the iron filings, which is what you are saying right now, what I am saying right now, your choice of career, who you are. How does Craig express Craig, and Tiffany express Tiffany, and Caroline express Caroline? That is the iron filing shape, and it's unique to each of us. We each have our own unique gravitational fields and electromagnetic waves. When people die, that goes. People way less when they die. And it's that life, that's actually like a life force. It's that, there's so many different ways of talking about it, mind, spirit, whatever. I just call it mind, because it's our unique initial process, its first cause. It enables us, it's the mind, and then into brain and body, and then we express ourselves. And if we understand or get a handle on that, then we can psychologically define mind as something as being how we think, feel, and choose. And what I've seen from my research in neuropsychology, neuroscience, etc., because I've worked in all those fields, is that thinking and feeling and choosing go together. You can't separate them. You can't think without feeling, and you can't think and feel without choosing. They inevitably go together. And in our non-conscious mind, we are thinking and feeling and choosing at incredible speeds, and drawing on our existing networks that are built over all these trees in our brain, which look like gravitational fields in our mind. We've been building these since we were in the womb. So we've got trillions of these thought networks. And the ones that are the biggest, and I've got some more little demonstrations here, one this size is not going to have too much driving influence on your functionality, but one this size is definitely going to catch your attention. So these are in our non-conscious space, and which is an infinite quantum space, and it's wired for optimism. So it's why I call it the wise mind. And around this wisdom is all our life experiences. At the core, the baseline structure, the lattice of this non-conscious mind is wisdom, because that's survival, and we as humans are driven for survival, love, whatever you want to call it. And then our experiences as we from a certain point in the womb to the age we're at today, or experiences, or cultural enculturation, or training, all of that is being built in these different colored trees. And the ones with the most attention are the biggest. And the ones with the most attention are the ones that are going to be able to move from the non-conscious, through the subconscious, into the conscious mind. So right now, as you're listening to me, you've got all kinds of thoughts moving into your conscious awareness of what I'm saying, related to your studies, related to experience, related to you as a person, what you've done, what you're going to do. So you're time traveling. You're going to the past, present, and future as I am talking. And that is these things moving up from the non-conscious to the conscious through the subconscious. Now, the unconscious mind is what happens when you have an anesthetic or you get knocked out by a football or something like that. So in other words, it's not, the unconscious is not, it's a different state of mind. It's a state of mind versus a type of mind. So mind is conscious, which is only awake when you're awake, subconscious, which is between the two, non-conscious, which works 24/7. So our mind, when you're alive, is always going. You can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you can't even go 3 seconds without your mind working. Your mind drives your choice of breakfast, eating your breakfast, your workout, your discussion now, your sleeping tonight, your nightmares, your dreams, everything. Your mind is always working. So based on that, my argument is, if your mind is the driving first cause, and if your mind keeps changing, and as we metacog, as we think about our thinking, as we analyze cognitively, in our cognitive mind, we respond to the prompts from the unconscious mind, and we look at things and we self-regulate, and which is all mind management. And as we develop that skill, which according to neuroscience we can do every 10 seconds, we can observe our thinking, feeling, and choosing, and the consequence of that, the product and the outplaying, which is what we say and what we do. We can observe that all the time, and we can develop that skill. So if we can develop that skill, if our mind is something that we can drive, that means we can also drive the neuroplasticity of the brain, which I've showed with my research too. You can change what you built into the brain. You can take this and change it into this. You can see this and decide I don't like it, or I do, and I can grow this. I can do. You can do what you want. You can change any. If someone challenges you and said, "Hey, that belief system, you think you're so objective, but you are being you coming from this angle. You saying this is this." Like, just look at the COVID arguments, vaccinations, and masking. Just look at how people are so adamant that that is an objective statement. Meanwhile, they at loggerheads. And so, a truly objective person, to come back to your point earlier, is someone who can say, I hear your point of view. I recognize it's different. That's amazing. I'm so interested. That doesn't mean I have to accept that, but I am open-minded enough to be able to recognize the difference without having to fight with you or tell you that you're wrong and I'm right. And that kind of thinking is using our networks and self-regulating to the point where we can actually have a decent, healthy experience with other humans and with ourselves, and also allows us to process, because these things create, toxic traumas and stuff create pain. And I mean, that's another discussion, but I'm trying to keep it around our current discussion of sort of success and just being able to think about our thinking. It's something that we are designed, I hate the word designed, that we wired, that we built. That's what we do. That's our humanity. And if we can unleash our humanity, can you imagine a world where we can actually listen to each other without fighting? And actually say, hey, I accept that you're different to me. That's really amazing. Let me learn. Let me benefit and be enhanced by your difference, as opposed to threatened by your difference.
I'm with you. I'm like, why can't we think different things and I still love you? The end. Like why do I have to hang out with people who believe like me, think like me, eat like me, exercise like what is that? Why do I need to live in the middle of confirmation bias and an echo chamber of behavior and thought and culture?
Exactly. It does not grow you.
Do you know what I love is I love people who go, look, and this is what I think, but I could be wrong. Like I often preface stuff when I'm talking about something that's not my area, but it's something I'm interested in.
Yes.
I'll say, look, because I get asked a lot of stuff on this show. I get asked a lot of stuff in my, workshops and different things that I do. I say, look, I don't know. I go, this is what I think, but do I have absolute unequivocal evidence? No, I don't. But if you want to know what I think A, B, C, but could I be wrong? Probably, and that's the thing, is that like we are in our culture, it seems, this is purely my observation, so desperate to be right. I'm like, why do you care so much about, like, how about, even, as you said,
Craig? What is right? I mean, what is right? What is normal? That comes back to, sorry to interrupt, but that comes back right back to one of your first comments about what success is, all this external stuff. Who's defining what that is?
Yeah. Well, it's individual for individuals, isn't it? That's why you and I can go, well, we've both got a gig tomorrow. We're going to stand in an auditorium and talk to 3,000 people. We're both excited, right? Yeah. I'd be excited. I know you'd be excited. Mm-hmm. I know most of our listeners would be terrified.
Yes.
Because it's not about the 3,000 or the auditorium. It's about our individual story about and reaction to that particular stimulus.
Exactly. And those narratives that we tell ourselves and the narratives that we are playing out. And what's super interesting as a therapist, what I've seen, and I don't practice anymore, but just observation of humans, you would have, I'm sure, observed this, is that the narratives we tell ourselves. So people are pretty good at kind of getting to a big kind of vision of I'm doing this because of something in my life. But there's a big mix up because we haven't emphasized enough for people's identities is so shot with, what we should be all the time. We're being so shaped by the world that people will get caught up in thinking, okay, well, that's what I can do, but that's what I should be doing. And there's this whole paradoxical kind of conflicted thinking inside of people. And then that leads to the narrative of, I know that that's what I can do. I know that's me, but I can't seem to bridge between, what I'm thinking about myself. And I know that this is the wrong narrative, but that's the narrative that's dominant. And that's because people are coming from this narrative that is more exercised. This narrative actually is only this big. So this one's bigger than this one.
Yeah.
And this creates so much conflict. So patients, for example, will say, look, I really want to be free and this and this and this. And it's really logical. And it's like amazing. You think, well, oh, why aren't you there? But then you hear the narrative about themselves. What do they actually think about themselves? What do they think about their life? What's their interpretation? And that is very often distorted because it's based on a distorted origin story. And until that's been uprooted, people are going to be stuck in this conflicted situation. So with therapy, as people start going into, even if it's therapy, counseling, coaching, or just going through mind management, you start becoming aware of the story, this narrative. And you start recognizing that there's a chasm between the two. And so what I've done in a lot of my work is also, how do we close that chasm? How do we get this thought detective work going over the right sort of time frames that we can actually make this strong enough? Because the chasm's only bridged when this thing is strong enough and has taken the energy from that, and then this no longer exists. It has to be uprooted and killed like a reed in a garden. Literally, no energy is ever lost in the brain or body or in the universe. So it's always transferred. So you've got to go through a very, very intense time-framed deconstruction, reconstruction process to get this uprooted and built into this, so that my narrative actually becomes my narrative that I'm actually enacting. It's not just a narrative that's actually, well, that's what I would like, but actually this is my narrative. And to bridge that gap. And I believe when people are in this state, they're so vulnerable. And we're all in this. A lot of us have got, there's very few people on the planet, I think everyone has a lot of these conflicted things that then influence our ability to connect with others, because this conflict is creating this narrative of, I know that's me, but this is what's dominating. I can't quite get there. And that creates a lot of friction between people, because this creates a lot of threat. And then people are competition, and people are scary, and people are, whatever.
And also, I love all that. And also we grow up, I think, being told how to be and who to be and why to be and what to be, and so there's this external kind of pressure from parents, from peers, from media, from social media these days, from education, from whatever, that I should be married by the time I'm X, I should have 2.3 kids, I should probably get a university degree or at least a trade. If not, well, definitely don't be a creative, because that's a recipe for disaster. And make sure that you should probably not eat meat, or you should eat meat, or or whatever it is, and you should definitely go to church.
Changes.
Yeah, and then so we understandably, I'm exactly the same. I grew up in a very religious household, and so there's stuff that still influences me, which is not good or bad. It's you grow up in a certain program, and then you become a reflection of that program. But then I think one of the challenges is trying to find out who I am innately beyond that external programming, and to be able to find your own, sounds cheesy, it's the only word I can think of right now, your own voice, or your own, trying to figure out like who I am beyond my programming and training and teaching.
Yeah, I call that the I factor, and it brings out truth value. And it's so that's why I love psychoneurobiology, because you've got that whole beautiful mind, brain, body connection, which because your mind, you are showing up in your brain and body, and we see such a beautiful a marriage between the way that the brain and body are designed to match the mind. The mind your mind fits perfectly with your brain and your body in terms of when it's working through you, you manifest you in the best way possible, and you can do something that no one else can do. And that is very powerful. And at the core, we all know that. We all know that we've got this, but the world and all these conditionings have interfered tremendously with that. So with my patients, one of the first things I would always do in every session would be to work on identity, then brain building, and then detoxing. So it's kind of that order. And that's something I've translated into all my work, that when you've got an app called the Neurocycle app, which is basically me giving therapies based on all these systems that I've developed, but essentially it's built around understanding your identity. Because if you understand that Craig could do something that no one else can do, and I get that because I've been studying this, so you could never be a threat to me, ever, even if we were doing exactly the same thing, because it's not going to be exactly the same, because the way you do it's different to me, and the way you do it enhances me. So if I uplift you and support you and grow you in whatever way I can and learn from you, I'm actually increasing my own intelligence, my own brain health, my own body health, because I'm confident in who I am. And that is accelerating my identity. And that, when people get that, it shifts, and that can be tapped. I mean, your identity can be knocked at any point. I mean, you can have all kinds of, things that can happen. But if you've got that understanding and that core of what that is, then you can easily move back into, you can very easily catch yourself through mind management and self-regulation and do an identity check and come back. And then just relating to also that point, and then relating to your point of growing up in a religious home and that kind of stuff, every experience we have, this is very simple but very profound. Every experience you have, from the moment you open your eyes to the moment you go to sleep, is being converted by your mind into your brain as a structural change. And as soon as it's built in your brain as a structural change, which is vibrations in proteins creating dendrites in this root branch formation, it's not connections. Memory is not connections between neural axons. It's not synapses, because synapses they only last very short temporary time. It's dendrites, the branches that grow out of that, where our memories are stored. So these things are real. They're made of proteins. There's quantum vibrations. This information that we're talking about now is quantum vibrations inside proteins arranged in specific structures. By the end of this conversation, there's going to be a couple of thousand roots here and a couple of thousand branches here of our conversation inside each of our brains, and each of the listeners and viewers' brains. So that what the point I'm making is that these things are physical realities. That conditioning, those things you've had, they're not just these airy fairy notions, what is consciousness philosophy. This is reality. This is real stuff. This is stuff that is growing in your brain. And as soon as it's in your brain in the form of a tree, it also goes into your DNA. So you have 37 to 100 trillion cells in your brain and your body, which is quite a lot of cells. And as we're talking now and building this thought in our brain and changing the neuroplasticity of our brain and changing the structure of our brain in a good way, because we're having a really good discussion. This is a very healthy discussion. We are also changing our DNA. Every single cell of our DNA, every single cell of our body is now changing. We are making 1 million plus new cells every second as humans. So we're constantly rebuilding our cells. The quality of those cells is dependent on many factors, and one of the main factors that drives this process are your telomeres, which are the ends of chromosomes. So if a chromosome looks like an X, my fingernails would be a telomere, and telomeres are a complex structure that is run by a whole bunch of other enzymes and things like that. But they are a proxy for our mental health. So what that means is that those million cells that we are making more or less every second are making up the organs in our body, which make up the systems in our body, including our brain. And we keep on replenishing and changing and growing. So over time, things are changing. But the quality of those is they don't do it. They're not self-emergent, so they can't do it on their own. You have to be alive. It doesn't happen in a dead person. This is only happening in an alive person. So it's driven by a force, which is the mind, I believe is the mind. And the way that the mind is managed influences the quality of the telomeres, which influences the quality of the cells we make. So if we are constantly in a state of trying to compete with everyone else, not understanding our identity, wanting external success to be the car in the bank account, etc., and you're not getting it. I've applied those 15 principles of those 15 seminars I've been to for success, and they're not working. What's wrong with me? Social media should be like this. If we are living under that, plus as a child growing up, this is the religion, this is the belief, this is the philosophy, anyone else is whatever, going to hell or whatever. All of that is toxic around your core of your beautiful, phenomenal identity that produces only something that you can do. The thought you just thought now, no one ever thought that before. So we've got to be able to tap through this stuff and find that inner core in order to then draw on that and develop that, and then we can go back and we can fix these, because these keep coming and they are always going to be there. I mean, not always going to be there. We've all had trauma, which we can need to change because they're volcanic in nature. We will experience trauma. Every adverse experience is trauma, whether it is that post on social media or an abuse. Obviously, those are two different degrees of trauma, but they're still an adverse experience, which creates a trauma. And that's a hardcore reality in our brain. And these things, if there's a lot of them, they crowd out the wisdom. And we need to really unpack this. And that's all mind work. That's all mind work. And it's self-regulated mind management. It's standing back and saying, oh my gosh, look what I just said. Or you're in a shop and someone looks at you in a certain way and you make an assumption, or you find yourself, I mean, as whites, there's so much implicit racism in us, we don't even realize it. If you've grown up privileged, and I'm very aware of this now because of growing up in South Africa and working through the apartheid era and the transition and the post-apartheid and living in the States, and I have 2 African-American son-in-laws, and, you know, I realized, I think I'm so open, but I see there's still implicit biases that I am consciously working on. So there's things in me that I grew up with that every now and then I'll be in a situation and I'm absolutely shocked how that comes up, but I am self-regulated enough, I'm managing my mind enough to see I own that. That was wrong. That made me feel terrible. I'm guilty for that, but I'm going to change it. I'm going to embrace, process, and reconceptualize and make that into something that is healthy so that I can be whatever. So that's kind of
I love
my
it.
take on this.
Wow.
We can talk all day about this.
I know. I'm so disappointed you've got another gig. I could talk to you for 2 hours and I've got so many great questions for you.
Or we'll just have to do it again sometime.
Well, we will. I'll get Tiff to send you. Now, just quickly, everyone, most of our listeners are listeners, but so the good doc, for those of you who are listening, she's been using a lot of props. So I'm going to get Tiff to put this on my YouTube channel so you can watch it and or listen to it or both. Is that all right, Tiff? Mm-hmm. Thanks. Just checking. Because the doc's been doing a lot of visual stuff too, which will help understand some of the dialogue. But you're amazing. I love what you're doing, and your energy is magnetic. Tell people about your books and where they can connect with you, follow you, find you, and consume more of your stuff.
Thank you so much. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. My book's available wherever books are sold. So I've got lots of books. This is my most recent, and this has got my most recent clinical trials and things in. It's very simply written, and it's got the first half of the book's got the mental health stuff we discussed and the clinical trials with very, as I said, simple, with graphics of the brain and that kind of thing that you can see. Second half is the system I developed over 38 years that is constantly being clinically trialed and tested, because science is an ongoing story. As you learn one thing, it changes and we keep going. So science is a constant growing. And then the second half is the system I developed, the neurocycle, which is a system, as I said, into which you can fit any technique. It's a system for how you organize your mind to drive the neuroplasticity of your brain. So it's how do I manage those moments where I'm totally overwhelmed or burnt out, or how do I recognize the patterns I'm seeing in my life and go and find the root of that trauma and reconceptualize it? How do I build my brain? How do I do an identity check? All that kind of stuff is in there. I have a neurocycle, an app called Neurocycle, which is literally me giving you therapy. I walk you through the time frame. It takes cycles of 63 days for us to identify, become aware. It's probably interesting for you for your research that you're doing, to become aware and to embrace, process, and reconceptualize. So deconstruct and reconstruct works in cycles of 63 days. Some people may use multiple. I've had patients who've done 2 years of 63-day cycles, so that's quite a few different cycles. So there's no recipe for one cycle fixes a trauma. If your trauma is very complex, you may need multiple. But the point is that you do the neurocycle daily, which is a 5-step system into which you fit what you're doing over cycles of 63 days, not 21. People think 21 days changes things. 21 days just builds this tiny little part, and it's not going to do anything. You haven't bridged the chasm. You need another at least 6 weeks, 42 days to build it into something that has a bit of power to actually impact you. Otherwise, the old stuff's going to dominate. So the neurocycle walks you through that process. It's in the book too. It's available on my website. Neurocycle is available on iTunes and Google Play, constantly getting revamped and updated. And my Instagram handle is Dr. Caroline Leaf. My webpage, drleaf.com.
Awesome. And the book that Caroline just held up, for those of you who aren't watching, it's called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. Doc, we know you've got a heart out about now. You've got to go and do this again and find some more energy, but we will hit you up because I've got a lot of questions and you're super good at this. So we appreciate you being on the U Project. Stay there for a minute. After we say goodbye, we'll say goodbye off air. Tiff, thank you.
Oh, I've got a girl crush, Harps. I've got a girl crush.
Yeah, well, I've got a new best friend. So you just get in the queue. Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening.
I've loved it too. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Love you guts.